A retired professor found 3 abandoned black triplets shivering in the rain at hospital. During his hospital stay, what the triplets did made every critic fall silent. Harold Jensen rubbed his knee as he walked through the hospital's fluorescent-lit corridor. The doctor's words still rang in his ears. "Just wear and tear, Mr. Jensen. Nothing we can do except manage the pain." He gripped his umbrella tighter. Checking his watch, 4:47 p.m. The sky outside had turned an angry gray, and fat raindrops pelted the windows. "Have a good evening, Mr. Jensen," called out Nancy, the receptionist he'd known for the past 5 years. Same greeting, same sympathetic smile. He'd been coming here twice a month since Margaret died, sometimes for his knee, sometimes for his back, sometimes just because the silence in his house got too loud. "You too, Nancy?" He nodded, pushing through the automatic doors into the covered walkway. The rain had picked up, drumming against the metal roof. His car sat at the far end of the parking lot. He'd arrived late and had to park in the overflow section. Thunder cracked overhead as he stepped out from under the cover. That's when he heard it, a small whimper, barely audible over the storm. Harold stopped, water already soaking through his jacket. There it was again, coming from near the emergency entrance. He turned, squinting through the rain. 3 small figures huddled against the wall, partially hidden behind a concrete pillar. "Kids? At this hour? In this weather?" "Hello?" he called out, taking a few steps closer. "Are you all right?" The figures shifted, and Harold's breath caught. 3 little girls, identical down to their rain-soaked braids, crouched together like frightened birds. Their summer dresses were plastered to their bodies, their shoes muddy and worn. None of them could have been older than 4 or 5. "Jesus Christ," Harold muttered, hurrying over as fast as his knee would allow. The girls pressed closer together, watching him with wide, fearful eyes. It's okay," he said, holding his umbrella over them. "Where are your parents? Your mom or dad?" The middle child, or at least, the one in the middle, shook her head, water dripping from her braids. "Mama left," she whispered. Harold's stomach dropped. "Left? When?" "A long time ago," said the one on the right, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Hours," added the third, sniffling. "She said wait here. She said someone help." Harold looked around frantically. The parking lot was nearly empty, most of the day staff already gone. A security guard stood in the doorway, watching them. "Hey!" Harold called out. "These children, have they been here all day?" The guard walked over, holding his jacket over his head. "Since about noon." Woman came in crying, 3 kids in tow. Said she needed to use the bathroom, never came back. "We've been trying to get someone from social services, but with the storm, 5 hours? They've been out here 5 hours. Harold's voice rose, making the girls flinch. He lowered it quickly. "Why aren't they inside?" The guard shifted uncomfortably. "Policy says we can't take in unaccompanied minors without proper authority. Liability issues. We called it in. That's all we can do." Harold stared at him, then back at the girls. Their lips had taken on a bluish tinge, their bodies trembling. The one on the left had her arms wrapped around her sisters, trying to shield them from the wind. "To hell with that," Harold growled. He shrugged off his jacket, draping it over the 3 of them. "Come on, girls. Let's get you inside and warm." "Sir, I can't let you dash," the guard started. Then stopped me. Harold met his eyes. "Call the police if you have to. I'm not leaving 3 children out in this weather." The guard hesitated, then stepped back. I'll let them know you're coming in." Harold turned back to the girls, kneeling despite his protesting knee. "I'm Harold. What are your names?" They exchanged glances before the middle one spoke again. "I'm Maya. MIA, said the one on the right. "Mila," whispered the one on the left, still holding her sisters. "Beautiful names," Harold said softly. "Would you like to come inside where it's warm? Maybe get some hot chocolate?" Another silent exchange between the sisters. Finally, Maya nodded. "Okay, but together," Mila said firmly. "Together," Harold agreed. "I promise." He helped them up, keeping his jacket wrapped around them. They walked slowly, the girls refusing to separate even an inch. Inside, the fluorescent lights revealed the full state of them. Clothes dirty and torn, hair messy despite the neat braids, shoes nearly falling apart. Nancy's eyes widened as they approached her desk. "Mr. Jensen, these girls need help," Harold said. They've been abandoned outside. Can you get them some blankets? And maybe call down to the cafeteria for some hot chocolate. Before Nancy could respond, a sharp voice cut through the lobby. What's going on here? A woman in a crisp blazer strode toward them, her heels clicking against the linoleum. Her badge identified her as Sarah Matthews, Social Services. Finally, the security guard muttered. Sarah looked at the girls, then at Harold, her expression hardening. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the children. The girls pressed closer to Harold's legs. He could feel them trembling. They are freezing and scared, he said. They need help, not bureaucracy. And they'll get it, through proper channels. Sarah pulled out her phone. I'm calling for emergency placement dash. No split. Mila interrupted, her voice stronger. Promise together. Sarah paused. It's not that simple. Finding a placement for 3 children at once dash. Then they're coming with me, Harold heard himself say. The words surprised him as much as everyone else. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Absolutely not. You have no authority dash. I have a warm house, plenty of room, and apparently more compassion than this entire hospital. Harold's voice was quiet but firm. You can come with us, supervise, call the police, whatever you need to do. But these girls have been through enough today. Mr. Jensen, Nancy interrupted softly. I can vouch for him, Ms. Matthews. He's been coming here for years. His wife was one of our patients before she passed. He's a retired professor, lives over on Maple Street. Sarah looked between Harold, the girls, and Nancy. The sisters had stopped trembling, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Finally, Sarah sighed. This is highly irregular. So is leaving children in the rain for 5 hours, Harold replied. Another long pause. I'll need to see your ID, proof of residence, and conduct an immediate home inspection. And this is temporary, understand? Just until we can find proper placement. Harold nodded, already reaching for his wallet. The girls stayed pressed against him, their small hands clutching his pant legs. Together? Maya asked quietly. Harold placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Together, he promised, not knowing how he'd keep that promise but knowing he had to try. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside, 3 little girls had found shelter, and an old man had found something he didn't know he was missing. Nancy returned with blankets and steaming cups of hot chocolate. As she helped wrap the girls up, she caught Harold's eye. Margaret would be proud, she whispered. Harold swallowed hard, watching the sisters carefully sip their drinks, still refusing to let go of each other. Maybe she would be. Maybe this was exactly what he'd been coming to this hospital for all these years. All right, Sarah said, closing her notebook. Let's get started on that home inspection. The drive to Harold's house was quiet except for the steady drumming of rain on the roof and the occasional whisper between the sisters. Sarah Matthews followed in her car, headlights visible in his rearview mirror. The girls sat huddled together in the back seat, still wrapped in hospital blankets. Almost there, Harold said, turning onto Maple Street. The familiar row of Victorian houses emerged through the rain, most windows already lit against the early evening darkness. His house sat at the end, its dark windows a stark contrast to the neighbors. He pulled into the driveway, killing the engine. This is home. Big, Maya observed quietly. Scary, Mila added, gripping her sister's hands. It's just old, Harold assured them, opening his door. Like me? Sarah parked behind them, already pulling out her notebook as she stepped into the rain. Harold helped the girls out of the car, keeping them under his umbrella as they hurried to the covered porch. His hand shook slightly as he unlocked the door. The house was cold and dark. Harold fumbled for the lights, illuminating the living room with its worn furniture and dusty photographs. He hadn't changed much since Margaret died. The floral wallpaper was fading, and her quilt still draped over the backs of chairs. I'll need to see all the rooms, Sarah said, clicking her pen, especially where the children would sleep. Of course. Harold turned to the girls. Are you hungry? 3 small nods. Kitchen first, then, he decided. You can warm up while Ms. Matthews looks around. The kitchen was the one room he'd maintained well. Cooking had become his solace after Margaret. He lifted each girl onto a chair at the old oak table, their feet dangling above the floor. Grilled cheese okay? He asked, already pulling bread from the cabinet. It was my daughter's favorite when she was your age. You have a daughter? MIA asked, the first word she'd spoken since the hospital. Harold's hands stilled for a moment. Had she? She went to heaven with her mama a long time ago. The sisters exchanged looks, a silent conversation passing between them. Mama? Maya finally asked. Harold focused on buttering the bread, buying time. Your mama? She must have been very scared and sad to leave you. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes when they are scared. She cried, Mila said softly. Said sorry lots. Sarah cleared her throat from the doorway. Mr. Jensen, we shouldn't dash. A sharp knock at the front door cut her off. Harold frowned, checking his watch, 7:13 p.m. Stay here, he told the girls, following Sarah to the door. Two police officers stood on the porch, rain dripping from their hats. Good evening, sir, the older one said. We received a call about suspicious activity involving children at this address. Harold's heart sank. The neighbors. Of course. I can explain that. Sarah stepped forward, showing her ID. I'm with social services. This is a temporary emergency placement dash. In a single man's home, the younger officer interrupted, eyeing Harold. At this hour? Would you prefer they stayed in the rain? Harold snapped, his patience wearing thin. They were abandoned at the hospital. I'm providing shelter while proper arrangements are made. Still, protocol requires dash. A small voice came from behind them. Mr. Harold? They turned to find Maya standing in the hallway, clutching her blanket. The cheese is burning. Shit, Harold muttered, hurrying back to the kitchen. Black smoke rose from the pan, setting off the smoke detector. The shrill beeping sent the girls into a panic. Mia covered her ears while Mila burst into tears. Harold grabbed a towel, waving it at the detector while Sarah opened windows. The officers followed, watching the scene unfold. It's okay, Harold repeated, finally silencing the alarm. Just a little smoke. We'll try again. He dumped the burnt sandwich in the sink, already reaching for fresh bread. His hands were shaking worse now. Here, the older officer said suddenly, stepping forward. Let me help. My kids love grilled cheese too. Harold hesitated, then stepped aside. The officer, his nameplate read Martinez, moved efficiently, making 4 perfect sandwiches while his partner finished inspecting the house with Sarah. The girls watched Martinez work, their fear gradually replaced by hunger as the smell of melting cheese filled the kitchen. Thank you, Harold said quietly when Martinez handed him the plate. Martinez nodded. Just keep records of everything. Okay? Photos, documents, receipts. Cover yourself. By the time the officers left, the girls had eaten 2 sandwiches each and were fighting to keep their eyes open. They need dry clothes, Sarah noted, making another mark in her notebook. And proper beds. I have some old t-shirts they can sleep in tonight, Harold said. And the guest room has twin beds. 2 can share. 1 can take the other. Tomorrow I'll get whatever else they need. Sarah's pen paused. Mr. Jensen, this is still temporary. Don't get too invested. Harold watched as Mila helped wipe cheese from Maya's chin. Too late. The next hour was a blur of activity. Harold found 3 soft t-shirts that hung like dresses on the girls. Sarah helped them wash up and brush their teeth with new toothbrushes from Harold's emergency kit. The girls refused to be separated for even a moment, so Harold pushed the twin beds together, making 1 large bed. Together, Mila reminded him as he tucked them in. Together, he promised again. He left the hallway light on and the door cracked open. Sarah waited downstairs, finishing her notes. I'll be back at 9 tomorrow morning, she said, gathering her things. This is still highly irregular, Mr. Jensen. The system isn't designed for situations like this. Maybe the system needs to change, Harold replied, walking her to the door. After she left, Harold sank into his armchair, exhaustion hitting him all at once. The house felt different, warmer somehow, despite the rain still battering the windows. He could hear soft whispers from upstairs, the occasional giggle. His phone buzzed, a text from Nancy at the hospital. Need anything? Harold looked around his living room, mentally cataloging what 3 little girls might need. Everything. They needed everything. Yes, he typed back. All of it. A small sound made him look up. Maya stood on the stairs, clutching her blanket. Can't sleep? He asked softly. She shook her head. Scary shadows. Harold pushed himself up, ignoring his knee's protest. Want to know a secret about shadows? They are just like playing hide and seek. Here, Let me show you. He followed her upstairs, where her sisters were already sitting up in bed. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, 3 little girls watched in wonder as an old man made shadow puppets on their wall, his heart growing fuller with each sleepy giggle. Around midnight, Harold finally crept back downstairs. He opened his laptop, starting a list of things to buy tomorrow. As he typed, he heard a car slow down outside his house, probably another concerned neighbor. Let them look, he thought. Let them whisper. These girls needed him, and maybe, just maybe, he needed them too. The rain began to ease, and Harold Jensen, for the first time in 5 years, didn't feel quite so alone. Harold woke to unfamiliar sounds, whispers, giggles, and tiny footsteps above his head. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. Then the events of yesterday crashed back. The rain, the hospital, 3 pairs of frightened eyes. Mr. Harold. Maya's voice called from upstairs. Help! He bolted up from his armchair where he'd fallen asleep, his knees screaming in protest. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, he burst into the guest room to find chaos. The girls had attempted to make the bed, but the sheets were twisted into a giant knot. Mia was tangled in a pillowcase, while Mila tried unsuccessfully to help her. Maya stood in the middle of the mess, looking distressed. We tried to fix it, she explained, bottom lip trembling. Harold felt the tension leave his body, replaced by something warm and unfamiliar. It's okay, he said, trying not to laugh. Here, let me help. As he untangled Mia from the pillowcase, his phone buzzed. Sarah Matthews, on my way for inspection. Bringing paperwork. Hungry? He asked the girls. 3 eager nods answered him. Let's get dressed and find some breakfast. The only clothes they had were yesterday's damp dresses. Harold made a mental note to add clothing to his growing shopping list. In the kitchen, he discovered another problem. His usual breakfast of black coffee and toast wouldn't do for 3 growing girls. He scrounged through his cabinets, finding an ancient box of oatmeal. We can add brown sugar, he offered, studying the expiration date. Only 2 months passed. That was probably fine. The doorbell rang just as he was serving the oatmeal. Sarah Matthews stood on his porch, looking fresh and professional, arms full of folders. Good morning, Mr. Jensen, she said, eyeing his rumpled clothes. I see you've had an eventful morning. Before he could respond, Mrs. Peterson from next door stepped onto her porch, openly staring while watering dead plants. Let's talk inside, Sarah suggested. They settled in the living room, the girls perched on the couch, spooning oatmeal into their mouths. Sarah spread papers across the coffee table. We need to discuss some concerns, she began. First, your age and health status. A sharp knock interrupted her. Harold opened the door to find Tom Wilson, the neighborhood watch captain, standing there with his arms crossed. Harold, Tom said stiffly. There are rumors. Not rumors, Harold cut him off. 3 children needed help. I helped. End of story. It's not that simple, Tom pressed. People are concerned. A single man your age, taking in 3, well, 3 what? Tom. Harold's voice was dangerously quiet. Tom shifted uncomfortably. You know how it looks. Yes, I know exactly how it looks to small-minded people who'd rather see children suffer than challenge their prejudices. Mr. Jensen, Sarah called from inside. We need to finish our discussion. Tom glanced past Harold at Sarah's official-looking papers. This isn't over, he warned, retreating down the porch steps. Harold closed the door harder than necessary. The girls watched him with wide eyes. Is he mad because we're black? Mila asked suddenly. The room went silent. Harold's heart clenched. Some people, he said carefully, are scared of anything different from what they are used to. But that's their problem, not yours. My concerns are more practical, Sarah interjected, shuffling papers. Your pension, the house maintenance, potential medical needs. Another knock. Harold ignored it. I have savings, he said. The house is paid for. I can. The knock came again, more insistent. Harold yanked the door open, ready to confront Tom again, but found Nancy from the hospital instead. She carried several shopping bags. Morning, she said brightly, pushing past him. I brought some essentials, clothes, toys, toiletries. Oh, and my daughter's old booster seats for the car. The girls perked up at the word toys. Nancy, Harold started. You didn't have to. Course I did. She began unpacking the bags. My church group took up a collection when I told them about these angels. Oh, and Mrs. Rivera at the grocery store wants you to stop by. She's got some things set aside for you. Sarah watched this interaction with interest, making notes in her folder. Support system, she murmured, writing something down. The girls gravitated toward Nancy, examining the clothes with wonder. She'd brought practical things, leggings, t-shirts, underwear, socks, but also 3 identical purple sweaters with butterflies. Pretty, Maya whispered, touching a sweater reverently. Get changed, Harold suggested. Then maybe we can go to the park. Absolutely not, Sarah interrupted. No public outings until we have temporary custody paperwork in order. Which reminds me. She pulled out more forms. Harold sat beside her, reading carefully while Nancy helped the girls change. Sign here, Sarah pointed. And here. This grants temporary emergency custody while we process the formal foster care application. Harold's hand shook slightly as he signed. Social services will cover basic expenses, she continued. But the stipend takes time to process. I don't need it, Harold said. I can provide. A commotion outside cut him off. They looked out the window to see several neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, gesturing at the house. Maybe the park isn't a good idea, Nancy said quietly. The girls, now dressed in their new clothes, pressed close to Harold. Are we bad? Mia asked in a small voice. No, Harold said firmly, kneeling down to their level despite his knees' protest. You are good, and brave, and perfect exactly as you are. Some people just need time to learn that. Speaking of learning, Sarah checked her notes. We need to discuss school enrollment. The sound of a car door slamming interrupted her. Through the window, they saw Tom Wilson talking to a police car. Oh, for heaven's sake, Nancy muttered. She marched to the door and threw it open. Officer Martinez. How's little Emily doing? Still loving those grilled cheese sandwiches. The tension broke slightly as Officer Martinez from last night waved at Nancy, clearly embarrassed. Just doing a welfare check. Protocol. Well, come in then, Nancy called. The girls just got dressed and they're looking absolutely precious. The next hour was a blur of activity. Officer Martinez did his check while trying to ignore Tom Wilson's hovering presence outside. Sarah filled out more paperwork. Nancy organized the girls' new clothes in the guest room dresser. Finally, things quieted down. Sarah packed up her files, pausing at the door. Mr. Jensen, she said, her professional mask slipping slightly. What you're doing, it's good. Difficult, probably impossible by normal metrics, but good. After everyone left, Harold sat in his armchair, watching the girls play with their new toys on the living room floor. They still stayed close together, but their movements were more relaxed, their voices lighter. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Got your message. Coming over tomorrow to discuss adoption options. Adoption. The word made his heart race. He looked at the girls. Maya showing Mila how to make her doll dance. Mia carefully arranging plastic teacups. Outside, the neighbors still whispered. Tom Wilson still watched. The world still judged. But inside, 3 little girls were building a fort out of couch cushions, their matching butterfly sweaters catching the afternoon light. And Harold Jensen, former professor, widower, and now emergency foster father, knew with absolute certainty that he would fight anyone and anything that tried to take them away. Mr. Harold, Maya called, breaking into his thoughts. Want to have tea? He smiled, easing himself onto the floor beside them. I'd love some. As he pretended to sip from a tiny plastic cup, Harold caught movement at his window, Mrs. Peterson watching again. This time, though, her expression wasn't suspicious. She was smiling. Maybe, just maybe, love could change more than just 4 lives in this old house on Maple Street. 2 weeks had passed since the rainy night at the hospital. Harold stood in the girls' bedroom. He'd stopped calling it the guest room, tugging at 3 identical navy blue dresses. Hold still, Maya, he said, trying to fix a crooked collar. Mila, please stop fidgeting with your shoes. Mia, your hair ribbon is coming loose. First day of kindergarten. The papers had finally gone through, thanks to Sarah Matthews pushing everything through the system at record speed. But now, facing 3 nervous faces in their new school uniforms, Harold felt his own anxiety rising. What if they are mean? Mila whispered, gripping her sister's hands. Then you tell your teacher, Harold said, finally getting Maya's collar straight. Or you tell me. Remember what we practiced? Be brave, Maya recited. Stay together, added Mia. Tell grown-ups, finished Mila. Harold nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. That's right. And remember, Nancy's daughter Rachel works in the school office. If you need anything, a car horn beeped outside. Sarah Matthews was waiting to accompany them to the school meeting. Harold had insisted she come. He wanted everything done properly, no room for complaints or concerns. The drive to Maple Street Elementary was tense. The girls sat in their booster seats, identical lunchboxes in their laps, while Sarah reviewed the paperwork one last time. Remember, she said as they pulled up, let me handle any questions about the custody situation. The school's brick facade loomed before them. Other parents were arriving too, many stopping to stare at the unusual group emerging from Harold's car. Principal Warner met them in her office, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Mr. Jensen, Ms. Matthews. And these must be the sisters. Triplets, Harold corrected firmly. Maya, Mia, and Mila. Yes, well, Principal Warner shuffled some papers. We do have some concerns about placement. They've been tested, Sarah cut in. All three are academically ready for kindergarten. That's not what Principal Warner paused, choosing her words carefully. Our school has certain traditions, standards, and with their unique situation You mean because they are black, or because their foster father is white? Harold's voice was quiet but sharp. The principal flushed. Mr. Jensen, please. We simply want to ensure the best environment for all our students. Then you'll treat them like any other children, Harold said. Or shall we call the Board of Education to discuss discrimination policies? Sarah shot him a warning look, but he saw approval in her eyes. After that, the meeting moved quickly. The girls were assigned to Mrs. Thompson's class, our most experienced kindergarten teacher, Principal Warner assured them. They walked to the classroom together, the girls' shoes clicking on the linoleum floors. Other children were already inside, their parents helping them find their cubbies and desks. The chatter died as they entered. Harold felt the girls press closer to his legs. Mrs. Thompson approached, her gray hair in a neat bun, her smile genuine. Welcome. You must be my new students. I have your desks ready, right here together. The girls looked up at Harold. He nodded encouragingly. Go on, he said softly. I'll be back at 3 o'clock. Right here. Maya took the first step, pulling her sisters along. They settled into their desks, still holding hands under the table. A boy at the next desk leaned over. Why do you all look the same? Because they are triplets, Tommy, Mrs. Thompson explained. That means they were born at the same time. But why is their grandpa white? The room went silent. Harold felt his face heat up. He's not our grandpa, Mila said clearly. He's our Harold. Mrs. Thompson clapped her hands. All right, children, let's all find our name tags and get ready for morning circle. Harold backed toward the door, watching as the girls slowly began to interact with their classmates. Outside in the hallway, he leaned against the wall, his knee aching. They'll be fine, Sarah assured him. Children are adaptable. But at lunch, Rachel called from the office. The girls were there, upset. Some older kids had made comments during recess. Harold broke every speed limit getting back to the school. He found them huddled together on the office couch, Mia crying quietly while her sisters glared at anyone who came close. What happened? He demanded. Just some fourth graders being foolish, Rachel said. Already handled it. But they wanted you. Harold knelt in front of them, ignoring his knee. Want to go home? They shook their heads. Want to show those kids that you're stronger than they are? 3 small nods. Good girls. He hugged them tight. Remember what we said this morning? Be brave, Maya whispered. Stay together, Mia added, wiping her eyes. Tell grown-ups, Mila finished. That's right. And you did exactly that. I'm proud of you. He walked them back to class, watching through the window as they rejoined the morning activities. Mrs. Thompson gave him a thumbs up. By afternoon pickup, the girls were running to him with pictures they'd drawn. But he noticed they still held hands between classes, still stayed close together at recess. That evening, as he helped them with their few pages of homework, his phone buzzed. A message from Tom Wilson, Emergency Neighborhood Association meeting tomorrow night. Topic: Concerns about recent changes in the community. Harold's jaw tightened. Then Maya tugged his sleeve, asking for help writing her name, and he forced himself to focus on what mattered. After bedtime stories and tucking them in, still together in the push-together beds, Harold sat at his kitchen table with a glass of water, his hands shaking slightly. His phone buzzed again. "Sarah, heard about the meeting. I'll be there. So will Nancy and Rachel. You're not alone." He walked upstairs one last time to check on the girls. They were asleep, their new school uniforms laid out carefully for tomorrow, 3 lunchboxes packed and ready. In the dim night light, he could see their faces relaxed in sleep, hands still linked even in dreams. They'd been so brave today, facing a world that wasn't always kind. Now it was his turn to be brave for them. He took out his phone and typed a reply to Sarah. "Meeting room at the community center. 7 p.m. I'll bring the girls' school pictures. Let them look at those innocent faces and try to defend their prejudices. Let them see what real family looks like." Harold Jensen had spent his life teaching literature, analyzing words and meanings. But now, watching his girls sleep, he was learning the most important lesson of all. Sometimes love had to be loud, had to stand up and fight. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more whispers, more judgment. But tonight, 3 little girls slept peacefully in their beds, safe and loved. And really, that was all that mattered. The morning started like any other. Harold woke early to pack lunches, peanut butter and jelly for Maya, turkey for Mia, ham for Mila. 3 identical apple slices. 3 small cookies. He'd gotten the routine down over the past month. His chest felt tight as he worked, probably from the stress of last night's neighborhood meeting. The arguments still rang in his ears. Property values, traditional community, his age and health. He'd sat through it all, Sarah and Nancy flanking him like guards, Rachel passing out school photos of the girls. By the end, even Tom Wilson had struggled to maintain his opposition. "Mr. Harold," Maya's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway in her unicorn pajamas, frowning. "Your face is all white. Just tired, sweetheart." He turned back to the lunches, but the room tilted suddenly. His left arm felt heavy, numb. "Mr. Harold," Maya's voice seemed far away. He gripped the counter, trying to steady himself. Something wasn't right. The tightness in his chest had become a crushing pressure. "Maya," he managed to say, "get your sisters. Remember the emergency number we practiced." Her eyes went wide. She ran from the room, calling, "Mia. Mila. Emergency." Harold slid to the floor, his back against the cabinets. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. The girls had practiced this drill, but he'd never thought they'd need it so soon. Mila appeared with the emergency phone they kept upstairs. Her small fingers punched 911 while Mia ran to the front door, unlocking it just like they'd rehearsed. "Emergency," Mila said clearly into the phone. "Mr. Harold is sick. He's on the floor. His face is white." She rattled off the address perfectly. Maya knelt beside him, her small hand gripping his. "Don't go to heaven," she whispered. "Like your other family." Harold tried to smile, but the pain was overwhelming. Through darkening vision, he saw Mia standing guard at the front door, Mila still on the phone. His brave, smart girls. The next few minutes blurred. Sirens. Paramedics. The girls refusing to leave his side until Nancy arrived, summoned by a neighbor who'd seen the ambulance. "Stay together," Harold tried to tell them as the paramedics lifted him onto the stretcher. "We know," they answered in unison. The hospital corridors were familiar, but everything else felt wrong. Doctors spoke in urgent tones. Nurses rushed with equipment. Words filtered through his haze. Minor heart attack. Immediate intervention. Could have been much worse. Hours later, he woke in a hospital room. The first thing he heard was arguing outside his door. "Protocol clearly states dash." That was Sarah Matthews. "I don't care about protocol." Nancy's voice. "Those girls need to see him. They are not technically family dash." "The hell they are not." Harold tried to sit up. A firm hand pressed him back down. "Stay still, Mr. Jensen." Rachel stood beside his bed. "Mom's handling it. The girls." His voice was rough. "Safe. At our house. But they are worried sick." More voices joined the argument outside. He recognized Tom Wilson's bass rumble, but instead of opposition, he was supporting Nancy. "Those children saved his life," Tom was saying. "They did everything right. If that's not family, I don't know what is. Finally, the door opened. Sarah entered, looking exhausted. You have visitors, she said. Against my better judgment. 3 small figures rushed in, still in their pajamas. They stopped short at the sight of all the machines. It's okay, Harold said softly. Just some wires to help me get better. They approached slowly, eyes wide. Maya touched his hand, careful of the fall. We did it right, Mila asked. The emergency plan. Perfect, Harold assured them. You are so brave. Are you going away? Mia's voice trembled. No, sweetheart. The doctors are going to help me stay right here with you. Sarah cleared her throat. Mr. Jensen, we need to discuss arrangements while you recover. The girls will need temporary dash. They'll stay with us, Nancy interrupted from the doorway. Rachel's already setting up the guest room. 3 beds, all together, just like at home. The girls looked at Harold for confirmation. It's okay, he said. Nancy and Rachel will take good care of you until I'm better. And you can visit me here. Promise? Maya asked. Promise, Sarah sighed. But he saw a smile tugging at her lips. I'll start the paperwork for temporary guardianship transfer. The next few days fell into a pattern. The girls went to school, then came straight to the hospital with Nancy or Rachel. They did their homework in his room, showed him their drawings, told him about their day. The neighborhood, which had been so divided, rallied. Tom Wilson organized a meal train. Mrs. Peterson watched the house. Even Principal Warner called to express concern and send a get-well card signed by the kindergarten class. A week after his admission, Harold's doctor stood at his bedside reviewing charts. The attack was minor, she said. With medication and lifestyle changes, you should recover fully. But, she glanced at the girls coloring quietly in the corner. You'll need help. Children that age require energy, stamina. I have help, Harold said firmly. More than I ever expected. The doctor smiled. So I've heard. The entire nursing staff has adopted your girls. They are quite the celebrities in pediatrics. That afternoon, Sarah visited with more papers. The foster care review board is concerned, she began. They're always concerned, Harold cut in. Too old, too sick, too different. But look at them, Sarah. The girls were teaching Tom Wilson's granddaughter a clapping game in the corner of the room. Their laughter echoed down the hospital corridor. They did everything right that morning, Sarah said softly. Most adults wouldn't have stayed that calm. They're extraordinary. Yes. She straightened her blazer. Which is why I've recommended your foster care license be upgraded to permanent status, with a view toward adoption. Harold's heart monitor beeped faster. The girls looked up, concerned. It's okay, he called to them. Happy beeps. That evening, after Nancy took the girls home, Harold lay in his hospital bed watching the sunset through his window. His chest still ached, but differently now, full instead of empty. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Bedtime update. Maya says tomorrow's show and tell topic is heroes and they are bringing in their emergency phone. MIA wrote you a get well song. Mila drew a picture of all of you as superheroes. They're okay. They miss you. Harold clicked through the photos Rachel had sent. 3 girls in matching pajamas, brushing their teeth. 3 backpacks ready for tomorrow. 3 drawings of a stick figure labeled Our Harold, surrounded by hearts. The heart monitor beeped steadily, marking time until he could go home. Until he could make their family official. Until he could show the world that love doesn't care about age or color or what anyone else thinks. Outside his window, the same rain that had brought them together fell softly on the hospital grounds. But this time, no one was left out in the cold. Take it slow, Mr. Jensen, the nurse said, helping Harold into the wheelchair. 2 weeks in the hospital had left him weaker than he'd like to admit. Your ride is here. Our Harold. 3 excited voices echoed down the corridor. The girls ran toward him, only slowing when Nancy called out a reminder to be gentle. Ready to go home? Harold asked, accepting gentle hugs from each of them. We cleaned your room, Maya announced proudly. And made your bed, added MIA. And got your medicine ready, Mila finished, always the practical one. Sarah Matthews stood by the discharge desk, reviewing final paperwork. Remember the conditions, she said. Part-time home health aide, regular checkups, and the girls need to stay with Nancy for 1 more week until you're settled. Harold nodded, though the thought of another week without them home made his chest ache in a way his heart condition never had. The ride home was filled with chatter. The girls told him about everything he'd missed, how Tommy from class had lost a tooth, how Mrs. Thompson had given them all gold stars for reading, how Rachel had taught them to make pancakes. And Tom's wife made us cookies, Maya said. The good kind with chocolate. Harold raised an eyebrow at Nancy in the rearview mirror. Tom Wilson's wife. Nancy smiled. A lot changed while you were away. Seems nearly dying tends to make people reconsider their prejudices. They pulled up to the house. Someone had mowed his lawn, trimmed the hedges. A welcome home banner hung on the porch, surrounded by balloons. Mrs. Peterson's idea, Nancy explained, helping him from the car. The whole street pitched in. Inside, the house was spotless. Fresh flowers sat on the coffee table. His chair had a new cushion. Even Margaret's old quilts had been carefully cleaned and refolded. The girls gave him a tour, showing him all the changes. Look, we organized your books. Maya pointed to the shelves. All the colors together. Harold didn't have the heart to tell them that alphabetical order might have been more useful. Sarah cleared her throat. Girls, why don't you help Nancy make lunch? I need to talk to Mr. Jensen. They hesitated, looking at him. It's okay, he assured them. I'll be right here. Once they were in the kitchen, Sarah pulled out her ever-present folder. We need to discuss the custody situation. I thought you recommended permanent status. I did, but my supervisor has concerns. Your health crisis. It raises questions about long-term stability. Harold's jaw tightened. I had a minor heart attack, not a terminal diagnosis. I know that. But the system has protocols. The system, Harold interrupted, is more concerned with following rules than doing what's right. Those girls saved my life, Sarah. They did everything perfectly because we're a family, and families take care of each other. Which is why I called in a favor. She pulled out more papers. Judge Anderson has agreed to hear your case directly. He's known for being unconventional in his approach to family court. Hope flickered in Harold's chest. When? Next month. But Harold, she leaned forward. It won't be easy. They'll question everything. Your age, your health, your finances, your ability to handle 3 active children. The fact that you're a single white man trying to adopt 3 black girls will come up, whether we want it to or not. Then we'll answer everything. I've got savings, life insurance, a solid support network. These past 2 weeks prove that. They'll also want to hear from the girls. Harold glanced toward the kitchen, where he could hear the girls helping Nancy make sandwiches. They're so young, but smart, and they love you. Sarah smiled slightly. They visited my office while you were in the hospital. Brought me drawings of their forever family. You, them, and apparently a dog. They want a dog. Focus, Harold. Right. He straightened in his chair. What do we do first? Sarah laid out the papers. Home study updates. Financial records. Medical clearance. Character references. And the girls need to stay enrolled in school, maintain their routine. The afternoon passed in a blur of paperwork. The girls came and went, showing him pictures, telling him stories, always touching him as if making sure he was really there. At dinner time, Nancy helped him up to say goodbye to the girls. Another week of nights without them felt impossible. Just 7 more sleeps, Maya said, hugging him. We counted, MIA added. On the calendar, Mila finished. After they left, Harold sat in his quiet house, looking at the changes they'd made. Their artwork hung on the fridge. Their shoes sat neatly by the door. Their presence lingered in every corner. His phone buzzed. Rachel sending the nightly update she'd maintained through his hospital stay. All 3 brushed teeth, stories read, prayers said. They asked God to help them stay with our Harold forever and ever, amen. Also to get a dog. He smiled, then began composing emails. To his financial advisor about restructuring his investments for the girl's future. To his lawyer about updating his will. To Tom Wilson about testifying as a character witness. The home health aide would arrive tomorrow. Physical therapy would start next week. Every step, every form, every medical appointment was a step toward keeping his family together. A soft knock at the door interrupted his planning. Mrs. Peterson stood there with a casserole. The girls told me your favorites, she said, stepping inside. They're remarkable children, Harold. This whole neighborhood was wrong about them. About you. They tend to have that effect on people. She set the casserole down. Tom told me about the custody hearing. The whole street's behind you now. We've all seen what real family looks like. After she left, Harold pulled out the girls' school pictures, 3 identical smiles, 3 pairs of bright eyes full of trust and love. He thought of that rainy night at the hospital, how close he'd come to walking past them. His phone buzzed again. Sarah this time. Judge Anderson reviewed initial paperwork. Hearing set for June 15th. Ready to fight. Harold looked at the pictures again. Ready didn't begin to cover it. He typed back, whatever it takes. Because that's what fathers do. They fight for their children, whether they share blood or not. They fight against prejudice, against illness, against a system that sometimes forgets that love doesn't follow rules. Another text from Rachel. Bedtime update. Girls want to know if you remembered your medicine. Direct quote. Tell our Harold we love him infinity +1. They are planning something for when they come home next week but won't tell me what. Harold smiled, touching the screen gently. 7 more days. Then the real fight would begin. The fight to make their family official, to give them the forever home they deserved. Let the system bring its questions. Let them doubt his age, his health, his ability to be what these girls needed. He'd show them all that family isn't about matching DNA or skin color or following standard protocols. Family is 3 little girls running down a hospital corridor, bringing light and laughter to sterile halls. Family is a community learning to open its heart and change its mind. Family is love that doesn't care about the rules. And Harold Jensen was ready to prove it to the world. The girls came home on a Sunday. Harold stood in the doorway, watching them run up the porch steps with their backpacks and stuffed animals. 1 week had felt like a year. Our room is still clean, Maya asked, racing past him. Just like you left it, he assured her. Medicine taken? Mila checked, ever the watchful one. Yes, Nurse Mila. Can we have pizza? MIA piped up. Nancy followed them in, carrying the last of their things. Already ordered. Rachel's picking it up. The house came alive again with their presence. Harold sat in his chair, watching them unpack, telling him about every minute he'd missed. His chest felt tight, but this time from joy, not pain. Mr. Jensen. Sarah Matthews stood in the doorway, looking unusually nervous. Can we talk? Outside. He followed her to the porch, his knee much better after physical therapy. The birth mother has been located, Sarah said without preamble. Harold's heart stopped. What? She's in rehab in Arizona. She? Sarah checked her notes. She wants to make a statement to the court. In our favor. Relief made him grip the porch railing. She's not contesting. No. She says. Sarah's professional mask cracked slightly. She says she's seen the news coverage. Knows the girls are safe, loved, wants to do right by them. Local media had picked up the story last week. Elderly professor fighting to adopt triplets who saved his life. The morning shows wanted interviews, but Harold had refused. The girls have been through enough. There's more, Sarah continued. Judge Anderson wants to meet the girls. Informally, before the hearing. He's never had a case quite like this. Inside, he could hear the girls laughing with Nancy, probably jumping on their beds despite the rules. When? Tomorrow. Court chambers. Very casual. No pressure. She paused. Harold, this could be good. The girls, they have a way of making people fall in love with them. He smiled. I know. That night, after pizza and stories, after making sure all 3 actually brushed their teeth, Harold sat on the edge of their pushed-together beds. Tomorrow, he said carefully, we're going to meet someone very important. A judge, like on TV, Maya asked. Similar. He wants to talk to you about staying here, with me, forever. Mila sat up straight. Forever, forever. That's the hope. Would you like that? Yes, 3 voices answered immediately. Can we get a dog after forever? MIA asked. Harold laughed. Let's handle one thing at a time. The next morning was chaos. Getting 3 excited 5-year-olds ready for court, even informal court, proved challenging. Harold's hands shook as he braided their hair. He'd been practicing with Rachel's help, determined to master it. They wore the dresses Nancy had bought, dark blue with white collars. New shoes clicked on the courthouse floor as they walked down the imposing hallway. Judge Anderson's chambers were warm, with pictures of his own grandchildren on the walls. The judge himself, a tall man with kind eyes, sat not behind his desk but in one of the comfortable chairs. Well, he said, smiling at the girls, You must be the famous Jensen triplets I've heard so much about. The girls looked at Harold, who nodded encouragingly. I'm Maya. I'm Mia. I'm Mila. The judge's eyebrows rose. And you can tell each other apart. We're different, Mila said matter-of-factly. Maya likes purple best. Mia hums when she reads. Mila always checks if we're okay. Judge Anderson leaned forward. And Mr. Jensen? He can tell you apart. Our Harold knows everything about us, Maya said proudly. Our Harold? The judge looked interested. Because he's ours, Mila explained, as if it were obvious. And we're his, even though you don't look alike. The girls frowned, confused. He looks like love, Mia said simply. Harold felt tears threatening. Sarah, standing by the door, wiped her eyes. The judge asked them about school, about their friends, about their home. They answered honestly, completely. When he asked about the day Harold got sick, they held hands but spoke clearly about remembering the emergency plan. You were very brave, the judge said. Our Harold needed us, Maya replied. Like we needed him, Mia added. In the rain, Mila finished. After an hour, Sarah took the girls to get ice cream while Harold stayed behind. Remarkable children, Judge Anderson said, returning to his desk. Yes, they are. You know the system has concerns. Valid ones, about your age, your health. Judge Anderson, Harold interrupted, then caught himself. I'm sorry, but they were alone in the rain, scared, abandoned. Everyone walked past them except me. Maybe because I know what it's like, being alone. My wife, my daughter. I thought that part of my life was over. But those girls, they saved me long before my heart attack. The judge was silent for a long moment. The hearing's in 2 weeks. It won't be easy. There will be questions, concerns. I'm ready. We're ready. Yes, Judge Anderson said softly, looking at the door where the girls had left. I believe you are. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Harold met with lawyers, doctors, social workers. The girls continued their routine, school, homework, play dates now that the neighborhood had embraced them. Every night, they added a link to the paper chain they'd made, counting down to Forever Day. The community rallied. Tom Wilson organized letters of support from every house on the street. Mrs. Peterson's church group sent character references. The kindergarten class made cards. Even Principal Warner wrote a glowing letter about the girls' progress and Harold's dedication as a parent. The day before the hearing, Harold sat with the girls in their favorite ice cream shop. They had hot fudge sundaes, a special treat for what Maya called their last day of not forever. Are you scared? Mila asked suddenly. Harold considered lying, then remembered they deserved the truth. A little. Are you? They shook their heads. God doesn't make mistakes, Maya said firmly, quoting Nancy. And we're supposed to be together, Mia added. Forever, Mila finished. That night, tucking them in, Harold noticed they'd added something to their bedtime prayers. Please help the judge know we're a real family, Maya whispered. Even if we look different, Mia continued. Because love is love, Mila concluded. Harold sat long after they fell asleep, watching their peaceful faces. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and questions and bureaucratic hurdles. Tomorrow he'd have to prove what he already knew in his heart. His phone buzzed. Sarah. Everything's ready. You should sleep. Another message from Nancy. The whole street's coming. Matching shirts and all. And one from Rachel. Girls picked out their Forever Day dresses. Don't worry. I got you a matching tie. Harold touched each of their faces gently. These miracle children who'd wandered into his life on a rainy night. Tomorrow they'd face the world together, just as they had every day since. Outside, the street was quiet except for the soft June breeze. Inside, 3 little girls dreamed of forever, while their Harold kept watch, ready to fight one last battle to make their dreams come true. The courthouse steps were crowded that morning. Harold gripped his cane, a temporary measure his physical therapist insisted on, as he helped the girls from Nancy's car. They wore matching white dresses with blue sashes, their hair perfectly braided by Rachel. Look, Maya pointed. The entire street seemed to be there, all wearing blue t-shirts with Jensen family printed across the front. Quite a turnout, Sarah Matthews said, joining them. She wore a formal suit but had a blue ribbon pinned to her lapel. Inside, the girls sat quietly between Harold and Nancy in the courtroom. They'd practiced this, when to stand, when to speak, when to stay quiet. Their small hands gripped his, warm and steady. Judge Anderson entered, now in full robes instead of the casual sweater from their meeting. All rise. The proceedings began formally. Lawyers presented documents. Social workers gave testimony. Dr. Roberts, Harold's cardiologist, spoke about his recovery and long-term prognosis. While Mr. Jensen did experience a cardiac event, she said, his response to treatment has been excellent. With continued medication and lifestyle management, there's no medical reason he cannot provide long-term care for the children. Tom Wilson testified next, his usual gruff manner softened. I was wrong about them, he admitted. We all were. Those girls belong with Harold. They are family, plain and simple. Principal Warner spoke about their academic progress. They are thriving, she said. Their bond with Mr. Jensen has provided the stability they needed to excel. The birth mother's statement was read into record. I made a terrible mistake that day, but my girls found a blessing. They have a real father now, one who loves them more than I could. Please, let them stay where they belong. Finally, Judge Anderson called the girls forward. They walked to the front together, 3 pairs of shiny shoes clicking on the wooden floor. Girls, he said gently, I need to ask you some questions. Will you answer honestly? They nodded solemnly. Do you understand what adoption means? It means forever, Maya said. No taking back, MIA added. Real family, Mila finished. And you want Mr. Jensen to be your father? Even though he's older? Even though he looks different from you? The girls exchanged confused looks. He's already our father, Maya said firmly. He saved us in the rain, MIA explained. And we saved him at breakfast, Mila added. A soft laugh rippled through the courtroom. Can you tell me why you want to stay with him? The girls held hands, something they still did when nervous. He reads us stories, Maya began. And checks for monsters, MIA continued. And loves us even when we're bad, Mila said. Like when? Judge Anderson asked. When we jumped on the beds, and spilled juice on his books, and cut our own hair. Harold winced at that memory. 3 identical uneven haircuts they'd given themselves last week. But even then, he just hugged them and called Rachel for an emergency salon appointment. And what about when he was sick? The judge prompted. Weren't you scared? Yes, they answered together. But we did it right, Maya said proudly. Called 911, MIA nodded. Stay together, Mila added. Judge Anderson looked at the papers before him. I have letters here from your teachers, your neighbors, your doctor, even the police officer who responded that morning. They all say the same thing, that you and Mr. Jensen belong together. He paused, looking at Harold. Mr. Jensen, do you have anything to add? Harold stood slowly, his voice shaking slightly. Your Honor, I taught literature for 40 years. I know all the words, all the fancy ways to say things. But this is simple. Those girls are my daughters. Maybe not by birth, but by choice, by love, by every moment since that rainy night. They saved my life, not just during my heart attack, but every day since I found them. I'm asking, I'm begging, let me be their father officially, the way I've been in my heart since the moment I saw them. The courtroom was silent. Sarah wiped her eyes. Nancy gripped Rachel's hand. Judge Anderson looked at his papers one last time, then at the girls, then at Harold. In my years on the bench, he began, I've seen many families. Some bound by blood, some by law, some by love. Rarely have I seen one bound by all 3. Blood between the sisters, law through this proceeding, and love that's evident to anyone who spends more than 5 minutes with this family. He shuffled his papers. The concerns raised about Mr. Jensen's age and health are valid, but they are outweighed by the extraordinary support system this family has built. More importantly, they are outweighed by the clear bond between father and daughters. Harold felt his heart skip. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that the adoption petition is granted. Mr. Harold Jensen is hereby recognized as the legal father of Maya, MIA, and Mila Jensen. The room erupted. The girls launched themselves at Harold, nearly knocking him over. Nancy and Rachel were crying. Sarah Matthews actually hugged the opposing counsel. Congratulations, Judge Anderson said over the chaos. Would you like to take a family photo? Harold knelt beside his daughters, legally and forever, as the court photographer snapped pictures. Forever? Maya asked, touching his face. Forever, he promised. Really forever? MIA checked. Really forever? Dog now? Mila asked hopefully. Harold laughed, hugging them close. Yes, even a dog. But first, I believe there's a party waiting. Outside, the street had organized a celebration. The community center was decorated with blue and white balloons. A cake declared, "Welcome home Jensen family," in careful frosting. Mrs. Peterson had organized a potluck. Tom Wilson's granddaughter played with the girls while adults congratulated Harold. Speech, someone called out. Harold stood, his 3 daughters pressed against him. 5 months ago, he said, I was alone. Now I have 3 daughters, a street full of family, and apparently a dog in my near future. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone asked me recently why I did it. Why taking 3 strange children that night? The truth is, I didn't think about it. Sometimes love doesn't need reasons. Sometimes it just needs a chance. He looked down at his girls, his forever girls. Thank you, he continued, for giving us that chance. For helping us become a family. For showing me that love doesn't care about age or race or what anyone thinks. It just is. Maya tugged his sleeve. Can we show them now? He nodded. The girls ran to get their backpacks, pulling out carefully wrapped packages. For everyone who helped, they announced, handing out small frames. Inside each frame was a child's drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands with a taller one, surrounded by hearts. At the bottom, in careful kindergarten writing, were the words, "Love makes a family." Harold watched as his daughters, officially, legally, forever his daughters, distributed their gifts. They'd been working on them all week, determined to thank everyone who helped make today possible. Happy? Sarah asked, joining him. Beyond words. She smiled. The system doesn't always get it right. But today it did. The party continued into evening. The girls ran with their friends, ate too much cake, fell asleep in a pile on the community center couch. Harold sat watching them, these miracle children who'd changed everything. Tomorrow they'd go home. Their real, legal, forever home. They'd hang their adoption certificates next to their school pictures. They'd start looking for a dog. But tonight, he just watched them sleep, these daughters of his heart and now of law, and knew that sometimes the best families aren't born. They are chosen, one rainy night at a time. 12 years passed in a blur of birthdays, school plays, and family dinners. Harold's hair turned completely white, but his heart stayed strong, strengthened, the doctors said, by the joy and activity of raising 3 vibrant daughters. Now he sat in the high school auditorium, watching Maya adjust her valedictorian cap in the mirror. MIA practice a viola backstage, first chair in the school orchestra. Mila reviewed her student body president speech one last time. Nervous? He asked Maya. A little. She smiled, the same smile he'd first seen in the rain 12 years ago. Will you help me practice again? Of course. He'd heard the speech 50 times, but he'd happily hear it 50 more. MIA poked her head in. 5 minutes till lineup. Where's Mila? Hey. Mila rushed in, their golden retriever Max trailing behind her. Sorry, had to check on the seating arrangements one last time. Harold watched his daughters fuss over each other's gowns, adjusting tassels and smoothing wrinkles. At 17, they were still identical in appearance but distinct in personality. Maya the scholar, MIA the musician, Mila the leader, yet still inseparable. Mr. Jensen, Principal Warner, now gray-haired herself, appeared in the doorway. We saved you a front row seat. Our usual spot, he said, winking at the girls. The ceremony was a blur of speeches and awards. Harold sat between Nancy and Sarah Matthews, both retired now but still family. Tom Wilson's widow dabbed her eyes nearby. Tom had passed last winter, but his honorary granddaughters still visited his grave weekly. Maya's valedictorian speech came first. She stood tall at the podium, her voice clear and strong. 12 years ago, she began, 3 scared little girls sat in the rain. Everyone walked past, except one man. He didn't see 3 black children or 3 problems or 3 reasons to look away. He saw 3 hearts needing love, and he gave it, without question or hesitation. Harold felt tears starting. Nancy squeezed his hand. People said it wouldn't work, Maya continued. A retired professor raising triplets? An old white man adopting 3 black girls? But love doesn't care about odds or expectations. Love just loves. Mia's viola solo filled the auditorium. Amazing grace, arranged specially for this moment. Mila stood to deliver her president's speech, which wove perfectly with her sister's words. Our father taught us that family isn't about matching faces, Mila said. It's about matching hearts. He showed us that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared but doing the right thing anyway. The girls had planned this, Harold realized. 3 perspectives on the same story. Their story. So as we graduate today, Maya returned to the podium. We carry these lessons. That love crosses all boundaries. That family is found in the most unexpected moments. And that sometimes, the greatest acts of courage look like an old man stopping in the rain. After the ceremony, they gathered in the same hospital parking lot where it had all begun. Now it was their tradition, every milestone celebrated here first. Remember how small we were? Mia asked, touching the pillar they'd huddled behind. Remember how scared? Mila added. Remember how cold? Maya finished. Harold remembered everything. Their tiny faces, their linked hands, their trust in a stranger who stopped when no one else would. Dad? Maya's voice pulled him back. Even after 12 years, the words still made his heart swell. We have something to show you. They led him inside to the pediatric ward. A new wing had been added, and on the wall hung a large photograph, Harold and the girls at their adoption day, surrounded by their community. Below it, a plaque read, "The Jensen Family Wing, where love makes families." We raised the money, Mila explained. The whole senior class helped. For kids like us, Mia added, who need someone to stop in the rain. The hospital will provide emergency housing, Maya said, so no child has to wait outside again. Harold stared at the photo, remembering that day. Your mother would be so proud, he whispered. Margaret would have loved you so much. She sent us to you, Mila said firmly. That's what Nancy always says. A commotion at the end of the hall drew their attention. A young woman stood there, 2 small boys clinging to her legs. She looked lost, desperate, the same look their birth mother must have had 12 years ago. Without hesitation, Mila approached her. Do you need help? The woman startled. I don't know what to do. Their father left? I can't. Come with us, Maya said gently. We know someone who can help, Mia added. They led her to Sarah's old office, now run by Rachel, who'd followed in her mentor's footsteps. Harold watched his daughters spring into action. Mila getting the boys' juice, Maya helping with paperwork, Mia calling Nancy's church group for emergency supplies. Like mother, like daughters, Rachel said softly, joining him in the doorway. They are amazing, Harold agreed. No, Rachel smiled. I meant like you. They see someone in need. They stop. They help. They love. That evening, they had their traditional graduation dinner at home. The dining room was crowded. Nancy, Rachel, Sarah, Mrs. Peterson, various neighbors and friends who'd become family over the years. Toast! Nancy called out. To the Jensen triplets, graduating with honors, full scholarships to state, and hearts as big as their fathers. To Dad, the girls said together, raising their glasses, who taught us that love is colorblind, ageless, and stronger than fear. Harold looked around his table, at his daughters, strong and confident, at his friends, who'd become family, at the photos on the walls tracking 12 years of love and growth. To family, he said simply. In all its beautiful forms later, after the guests left, the girls curled up with him in the living room, just like they used to, though they were far too big now to all fit in his lap. Max sprawled across their feet, graying but still protective. Happy? Maya asked, just as she had 12 years ago. Beyond words, he answered, just as he had then. Forever. Mia checked. Forever, he promised. Really forever? Mila pressed. Harold hugged his daughters close, these miracle children who'd become remarkable women. Outside, a soft rain fell, just like that night 12 years ago. But now, no child waited in the cold. Now, thanks to his daughters, other lost hearts would find their way home. Really forever, he whispered. And then some, because that's what love does. It grows. It spreads. It changes the world, one rainy night at a time. And somewhere, in a hospital parking lot that had become holy ground for one family, a plaque reminded everyone who passed. Sometimes love looks like an old man stopping in the rain. Sometimes family is found in the moments between heartbeats. And sometimes, the greatest miracles come in threes.